When a king dies, you kind of expect a clean paper trail.
Oh, absolutely. A signed decree, a neatly drawn family tree.
Yeah, a smooth transition where the crown just goes to the firstborn son and history simply moves forward. But when you step into the blood-soaked, forbidden archives of Westeros, those neat legal documents just burn to ash.
They really do.
Mhm.
We are looking at a historical landscape today that is just completely steeped in paranoia.
It's a shadowy realm. I mean, treason is often just a matter of perspective here, and the ultimate truth of who belongs on a throne isn't decided by birthrights or laws. It is literally decided by the edge of a sword.
It is the absolute pinnacle of dynastic terror. Look, we are not examining a conventional historical record today. We are unearthing a brutal, hidden era that the chroniclers of the Seven Kingdoms have, often tried to gloss over or reshape.
Right.
To understand this period, we really have to look past the official tapestries and read the letters written in blood.
Welcome to a very different kind of deep dive. Today, we are walking deep into the dark, hushed corridors of the Red Keep. And the premise of the world we're exploring today is, frankly, chilling.
Yeah, it sets a very specific dark stage.
At this specific point in Westerosi history, the literal dragons are dead. Their massive, black-scorched skulls are just gathering dust in the lightless depths beneath the castle. The fire-made flesh has been extinguished from the world.
But the ruling Targaryen dynasty, they didn't need dragons to burn a continent.
No, they didn't. They found terrifying, deeply human ways to destroy each other.
Which brings us to the focus of our descent into the archives today, the Blackfyre Rebellion.
The dragons without wings?
Exactly. The histories refer to it as a war fought by dragons without wings. Our goal here is to dissect the intricate political chess moves, the venomous family resentments, and the systemic societal failures that fractured an entire realm.
We're really examining the era of the Great Bastards and that catastrophic legendary conflict of the Red Dragon versus the Black.
And as we unpack this, we need to remain impartial about the sheer political divide at the time, because both sides had deeply ingrained reasons for their actions.
So as you listen today, I want you to picture yourself navigating those paranoid halls. Imagine you're in a society where the true imminent danger isn't a fire-breathing monster plunging from the clouds, but the quiet whisper of a jealous brother standing right next to you in the throne room.
It's terrifying to think about. To comprehend how a kingdom fundamentally tears itself apart from the inside, we first have to analyze the fragile, deeply resented peace that set the stage for the slaughter.
Right, the calm before the bloodbath.
Yeah. The foundation of this conflict begins during the reign of King Daeron II. Now, on paper, by every modern metric of statecraft, Daeron was a visionary.
He was a scholar, right.
Yes, he was thoughtful, measured, and he heavily favored diplomacy and strategic marriages over open warfare.
I mean, he sounds like a modern diplomat dropped into the Middle Ages.
Pretty much. He wasn't the picture of a rugged warlord out in the training yard. He was slender, he preferred the library to the armory, and he surrounded himself with learned maesters.
The scholars and healers?
Right, rather than seasoned generals. But in a brutal, martial continent like Westeros.
Where the great lords measure a man's worth by the strength of his sword arm and the blood on his armor.
Exactly. Intellect is almost universally mistaken for weakness there.
And the tragedy of King Daeron is that his greatest political triumph is the very thing that laid the groundwork for his near destruction. I mean, Daeron achieved what his ancestors, even those riding literal dragons, failed to do for nearly 2 centuries.
He brought the fiercely independent desert region of Dorne into the realm.
And he did this by marrying a Dornish princess, Miriam Martell.
A brilliant diplomatic move, impartially speaking. But the mechanism of that peace is where the friction really starts. Daeron doesn't just sign a treaty. He floods the Red Keep with Dornish influence.
Right. Suddenly you have Dornish food, Dornish customs, and Dornish lords draped in brightly colored silks just casually walking the halls.
Receiving prestigious appointments and whispering in the king's ear.
Okay, let's unpack this, because from a modern perspective, Daeron brings his kingdom's literal worst historic enemies into the boardroom and just gives them all the executive suites.
Yeah, it was a massive cultural shock.
Were the traditional lords just supposed to smile and accept that their ancestors' blood was shed for nothing?
And you really have to view this through the lens of generational trauma and historical geography. The traditionalist lords of the realm, specifically those from the Reach and the Stormlands, They share borders with Dorne.
The marches.
Yes, the Marches. For thousands of years, these bordering regions have been locked in a brutal cycle of raids, skirmishes, and blood feuds.
So if I'm a hardened Lord of the Reach, and my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather all died with Dornish spears in their chests, I am not going to care about the broader economic benefits of unity.
Not at all.
I'm going to walk into the Red Keep, see my family's ancient, blood-sworn enemies sitting in the executive council chairs, and feel a profound sense of betrayal. The traditional Westerosi lords felt their sacrifices were being mocked, basically.
They felt their martial heritage was being systematically erased by a scholarly king who favored their worst enemies. And that cultural alienation created a massive powder keg.
A huge one.
These lords watched their hard-won historic supremacy be replaced by foreign influence. The resentment wasn't just political. I mean, it was deeply personal and deeply cultural.
They were searching for a champion, someone who represented the old ways, someone who validated their martial worldview.
And into that powder keg steps a man who looked like he'd been chiseled out of marble by the gods of war themselves.
Oh, wow, yeah. The bastard son of the late King Aegon the Unworthy and his cousin, Dana the Defiant.
A man named Daemon. He possessed the striking, almost magical features of old Valyria.
The spun silver gold hair, the piercing deep purple eyes.
Right. While King Daeron is reading in the library, Daemon is out in the yard in dark, ornate armor, breaking lances and fighting like a titan. He is the warrior reborn.
The contrast could not have been starker.
But looking like a king and possessing the legal right to rule are two very different things.
True.
That is, until the dying King Aegon the Unworthy commits a final, chaotic act that just fractures the foundation of the dynasty. On his deathbed, the old king legitimizes all of his bastards.
Which is wild enough on its own.
It is. But more devastatingly, he takes Blackfyre, the ancestral Valyrian steel sword of Aegon the Conqueror, and he bestows it upon Daemon.
Okay, we really need to pause and establish what giving that sword away actually means in this lore. Valyrian steel isn't just sharp metal.
No, it's a dark, magical alloy from a fallen empire.
And Blackfyre is the specific blade that the first Targaryen king used to forge the Seven Kingdoms. It is the absolute crown jewel of their legitimacy. Handing that sword to a towering warrior bastard instead of the scholarly legitimate heir, that is a cataclysmic mixed signal.
It's the ultimate subversion of legal succession.
Oh.
I mean, in a feudal society that lacks a strong constitutional framework, power is largely an illusion maintained by symbols.
Right.
Possessing the conqueror's sword is tantamount to possessing the mandate of heaven. By gifting Blackfyre to Daemon, the old king practically declared him the true heir in the eyes of any lord looking for an excuse to rebel.
So the old king legally leaves the throne to his scholarly son, but hands the literal symbol of absolute power, the conqueror's blade, to the towering warrior bastard.
Basically, yes.
That's like handing someone the nuclear launch codes but telling their brother he gets to be president. It guarantees a civil war.
It absolutely sets the stage for one. Every disenfranchised lord looking at the Dornish influence at court now has a focal point. They see the Red Dragon, the legitimate King Daeron, and they see the Black Dragon, Daemon, wielding the Sword of Kings.
And the tension was immediate, wasn't it?
Oh, instantly. The martial lords began flocking to Daemon, whispering that the sword chose the king. War seemed utterly inevitable the moment Aegon the Unworthy took his final breath. Yet, here is the massive, shocking twist embedded in the lore.
The spicy plot twist.
Yes. The war did not happen.
Wait, here is where it gets really interesting, because this detail completely upends the traditional narrative. Daemon Blackfyre, armed with the ultimate weapon of legitimacy, backed by furious traditionalist lords, did not rebel.
He did not. He tolerated Daeron's rule for over 10 years.
A whole decade.
Yeah, he accepted lands, he married, he had children, he just sat on the simmering resentment for a decade. The simplistic histories paint Daemon as a rabid usurper hungry for a crown, but the reality of his restraint paints a picture of a man deeply conflicted.
Torn between his loyalty to his half-brother the king and the monumental expectations placed upon him by the sword he carried.
Exactly. Daemon kept the peace. The cultural war simmered in the shadows, but the realm held together.
Which raises the ultimate question for this deep dive. If the warrior with the sword is keeping the peace, how do you radicalize him? How do you push a kingdom over the edge after a decade of restraint?
You don't do it on a battlefield.
No, you do it in the shadows. You attack his pride, and you completely rewrite his reality.
The fracture of the realm was driven by a toxic, venomous hatred between the Great Bastards. We have to introduce the true architect of the rebellion. a man named Igor Rivers.
Known forever to history by his terrifying moniker, Bittersteel.
Bittersteel, a man whose name perfectly encapsulates his entire worldview.
He is another bastard son of the old king, right? Fiercely disciplined, angry, and defined by a deeply personal hatred for yet another half-brother, the king's spymaster, Lord Bloodraven.
That rivalry is the dark beating heart of this era. Bittersteel represents the ideological extreme of the traditionalist lords. He loathes the Dornish influence at court, and he despised the scholarly regime.
But he couldn't take the throne himself.
No, but more than anything, Bittersteel possessed a singular dark political brilliance. He understood that Daemon was the perfect charismatic vessel for his own vengeance. Bittersteel couldn't launch a rebellion himself, but if he could maneuver Daemon onto the throne, he could reshape the world in his own harsh image.
Wait, you're telling me this epic realm-shattering rebellion wasn't even Daemon's idea? He was basically pushed off the cliff by his angry brother.
That is the tragedy of it. Bittersteel becomes the venomous whisper in the dark. For years, he preys on Daemon. He takes all that xenophobic anger from the Lords of the Reach and the Stormlands, and he funnels it directly into Daemon's ear.
Just a constant drip of poison.
Yes. He reminds him, day after day, that he holds the Conqueror's sword while foreign lords make laws in the king's name.
He weaponized Daemon's own sense of honor and duty. But whispering about court politics wasn't enough to make a loyal brother commit treason. Bittersteel needed to give Daemon moral justification.
A casus belli.
Right, something that would absolve Daemon of the sin of usurpation. So Bittersteel engineered a brutal treasonous smear campaign.
This is where it gets incredibly sinister. He starts spreading the rumor that King Daeron is falseborn. He whispers that Daeron is not the true son of the late King Aegon at all.
Instead, he claims Daeron is the illegitimate product of a secret affair between the Queen and Aemon the Dragon Knight.
And to grasp the devastating power of this rumor, we must understand Aemon the Dragon Knight. He was a legendary warrior of the Kingsguard, beloved by the realm, and importantly, the Queen's own brother.
And the old king, Aegon the Unworthy, despised his wife and his brother.
Passionately. He had previously spread this rumor himself out of pure spite. Bittersteel exhumed this old, scandalous lie and weaponized it with lethal precision.
The psychological manipulation here is terrifying. Bittersteel didn't just start a political dispute, he engineered a holy crusade.
He really did.
By convincing Daemon that Daeron is actually the illegitimate usurper, Bittersteel flips the entire moral script. He convinces Daemon that taking the throne isn't treason, it's an act of salvation. He is saving the Targaryen dynasty from an imposter.
And that is the psychological breaking point. Once Daemon internalizes the belief that he is the only true legitimate heir of the dragon, the decade of peace shatters.
The cultural war snaps into open violence.
The realm violently fractures in two, tearing along the fault lines of tradition versus progress, martial might versus diplomacy. Fathers take up arms against sons, and ancient houses split down the middle.
And the visual manifestation of this split is haunting. The Targaryen banner, the iconic three-headed red dragon on a black field, is violently inverted.
Daemon and Bittersteel raise a new standard. A jet-black dragon breathing black fire upon a blood-red field.
The inverted dragon. It is a masterpiece of psychological warfare. I mean, it visually communicates their entire ideology.
Perfectly. Daeron represented the red dragon, unity, and an evolving realm. Daemon claimed the black dragon, symbolizing martial supremacy, the old ways, and the undeniable right of the Conqueror's sword.
So all the whispers in the dark, all the cultural alienation, the toxic family dynamics, and the weaponization of history, it all cascades toward a single, catastrophic physical confrontation.
The Shadow War finally steps into the light.
Bringing us to the climax of the rebellion, the Redgrass Field.
The Battle of the Redgrass Field is one of the most massive, devastating engagements in the history of Westeros. The Loyalist armies and the rebel armies converge, and it is an apocalyptic scene.
Thousands of men clashing in a chaotic, deafening roar of steel.
And at the absolute center of this maelstrom is Daemon Blackfyre. He is fighting exactly how a warrior god is expected to fight. He's a titan on the battlefield, cutting down seasoned knights with Valyrian steel.
But crucially, he is fighting with incredible martial honor. During the heat of battle, he strikes down a valiant knight, but instead of riding over him, Daemon actually pauses.
He stops the chaotic advance of his own line.
Just to ensure the wounded man is carried off the field by maesters, he embodies the romanticized, chivalric ideal of war.
Daemon is fighting a war belonging to the songs and the ancient tapestries. Face to face, honoring your opponent, proving your right to rule through personal valor. But this brings us to the thematic clash that defines the era.
Because while Daemon is practicing chivalry on the ground, a cold, ruthless reality is waiting high above the battlefield.
On a vantage point known as the Weeping Ridge.
Waiting on that ridge is the king's spy master, Lord Bloodraven, Bittersteel's hated rival.
Bloodraven is a chilling figure. Pale, albino, wrapped in shadows, with a stark red birthmark staining his face.
And in his hands, he holds a massive bow carved from the pale, magical wood of a weirwood tree.
Bloodraven represents the grim, modern evolution of statecraft and warfare. To the spy master, honor on the battlefield is a deadly illusion.
Chivalry means nothing when the survival of the realm is at stake.
Exactly. Bloodraven looks down at Daemon, pausing to protect a wounded enemy, and he doesn't see a noble king. He sees a target standing still.
So, Daemon pauses in the heat of battle, acting like the honorable warrior king, and Bloodraven is just waiting up there in the shadows, ready to unleash a volley of black arrows. It's the ultimate death of chivalry.
The triumph of ruthless pragmatism. Bloodraven unleashes a blinding volley of arrows from the ridge. They rain down upon Daemon and his twin sons.
The Black Dragon falls.
The grand realm-shattering rebellion is effectively decided not by a legendary sword duel between rival claimants, but by a calculated, dishonorable assassination from a distance.
It violently strips every ounce of romance away from the lore. The honorable warrior is gunned down from afar by the shadowy spy master.
And then chaos ensues. Bittersteel rallies the breaking rebel forces and launches a furious, suicidal charge to recover the sword Blackfyre, engaging in an epic duel with Bloodraven that costs the spy master his eye.
But the battle is lost.
Bittersteel is forced to flee across the sea with the sword, leaving the broken bodies of the Blackfyre Rebellion rotting on the Redgrass Field.
When we synthesize the tragic lessons of this conflict, the insights are profoundly disturbing.
You really do not need literal winged dragons to burn a civilization to the ground. The mechanisms of destruction are far more mundane and far more terrifying.
A well-meaning but culturally blind king. An indecisive, spiteful father who elevates a symbol over the law. And brothers who just cannot forgive each other's existence.
It forces you to reflect on the sheer fragility of any society. When a culture begins to value powerful symbols, like a legendary sword, over the boring, stabilizing force of actual laws, how easily can it be manipulated?
You had a scholarly king who achieved peace, and a charismatic warrior who actually maintained that peace for 10 years. But it was all dismantled.
Why? Because an angry man in the shadows weaponized the historical prejudices of the realm, proving that a lie tied to deeply held cultural resentments is more powerful than the truth.
A society lacking strong institutional foundations will always revert to martial symbols to legitimize power. Bittersteel understood that perfectly.
And Bloodraven understood that the only way to stop that symbol was to destroy the man wielding it, regardless of the moral cost.
Which brings us to a final, chilling thought for you to mull over as we close the archives on today's deep dive. Bloodraven's arrows, falling from the sky, might have ended the battle at the Redgrass Field. It stopped Daemon in his tracks and kept the scholarly king on the throne.
But consider the long-term cost of that pragmatism.
Right. When you assassinate a revered, charismatic leader with a dishonorable strike from the shadows, do you actually kill the rebellion? Or do you just make him a martyr? You really have to wonder if stripping the honor out of the victory only guarantees that the survivors will cross the sea, regroup in the dark, and ensure that the Black Dragon will rise again.
Because when the legal documents of power burn, and history is written by arrows from the shadows, the ghosts of a broken realm never truly stay buried.